trauma. And as you write them down, you'll come to realize that's the space where healing is needed. And healing can only occur through courageous conversations like the one that we'll pursue tonight. Before we get started with our panel discussion, I'd just like for us to just enter into a space of being grounded. And so if we can just be still and just clear our minds of all the things that we experienced today and prior to today, and just be still and centered. Let ourselves be present in this moment and tune into the miracle that is unfolding right here, right now, in this space. The miracle of people of all backgrounds coming together for a courageous conversation. All present. Clear the pathway. Just inhale and exhale. Let's just take a deep breath. And just clear everything out. Let's do it one more time. In, clear. And just think. Deep reflection. Think with me. I am safe to be where I am. I am in the right place at the right time. I trust the lessons to be learned and the people joining me on this journey. They're necessary for my life's purpose and the next chapter of my life. I move through this conversation with a grateful heart. I shall acquire wisdom that will unite me with others. It is safe for me to notice my feelings, my emotions. It's an indicator of lessons learned. Some that I need to keep, some that I need to release. It's safe to practice patience, curiosity, hopefulness, and wonder. For in the end, we'll come to the point of center, where we discover again and again and again that there is one power, one presence, and we are part of that universe, and united we are. We are present, we are well, and we are ready to embark upon this journey. We proceed from darkness into light, and so it is. Amen. Thank you. And so it's with an open heart and soul that we began to travel down the pathway of living a little bit more and learning a little bit more. And we realize that we're more similar than we are different. We just came here by a different path. And so tonight, I'm very fortunate to be a part of this panel and have the very privilege to turn this program over to two very capable, competent, and loving individuals that I respect the heck out of. They're two emerging leaders in the space of social justice. They are Ms. Angela Blanchard and Mr. Philip Reed. Thank you for serving as our moderators.
Thank you, Reverend Glenn, for those beautiful grounding words. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And welcome everyone. Now that we've taken a deep breath, welcome to Healing the Trauma of Racism, our roundtable tonight. So as Reverend Glenn mentioned, our roundtable was born of our Act Now group coming together after the killing of George Floyd. And everyone here and in our larger Act Now group wanted to do something. We had one thing in common. We wanted to act now and do something. The group you see before us was a subgroup that started. And one thing that just instinctively I knew for sure is that we had to develop trust. We had to trust each other if we were going to delve into these conversations. So that is where we started. Vince introduced us to the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who joins us tonight. And we quickly identified trauma as a significant factor in the experience of racism, both on the receiving end and also on the perpetrating end. And we will explore that a little later tonight. But what came of these conversations that developed was that we created a safe space in which to hold authentic, raw, truthful, purpose-driven conversation. And it fit right into our spiritual principles, having these conversations and embarking on this journey together of what is done to you, what you do to others is already done to you. And that's the karmic flip side of do unto others, the golden rule that we hear so much. So we want to be a part of this change. We want to be a part of co-creating the world that we want to see. And so through these conversations, we started to hear each other saying things like, I've never said this before, or I've never said this in the company of white people or a mixed audience, or I'm sorry, guys, I never realized this was happening. So these things were coming out of us. And it was a space where there was no shame, there was no judgment, there was listening, there was validation. And we are here to utilize our individual and our collective power to create change.
We recognize that we were modeling that these important, authentic conversations can be held in a safe environment where intentions remain on the side of healing, productivity, and action. Tonight, we are taking this conversation public. We will hear from Bessel van der Kolk, author of The Body Keeps the Score, about what is trauma and how does it impact our bodies and minds, and how we can use this information in combination with our spiritual principles and dedication to set in motion a process of healing. We will introduce the concept of trauma, followed by a discussion on how trauma relates to racism, the traumatic effects of racism, followed by some bodywork healing exercises by our special guest, Lisha Sky. From there, our conversation will turn into the healing process, as well as what you can do to learn more. Have conversations like this one within your circle and get involved in the healing process to put an end to what many refer to as our country's original sin and deepest wound.
So I'd like to begin now by introducing our experts and our special guest tonight, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, one of the world's foremost experts on trauma and author of the New York Times bestseller, The Body Keeps the Score. And he is joined by Lisha Sky, a somatic educator, body worker, artist, and musician. Lisha guides transformational experiences, incorporating dynamic observational exercises, music, movement, vocalizing, enhanced listening, and touch to foster safe, transformative, inner and interpersonal connection. And we will actually be going through an experiential piece later on tonight with Lisha. And Lisha is also the wife of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Also on our panel, we have Julie Barron, who is president of the Michigan Psychedelic Society, executive director of Decriminalized Nature Ann Arbor, and psychedelic integration specialist at Transpersonal Michigan, and ketamine integration specialist at Michigan Progressive Health.
And we have Alexis Douglas. Alexis has a personal life mission to help restore love to those who have been oppressed. She is an anti-racism educator, co-founder of Actively Authentic Allyship Methodology. She is a 2020 Peace Fellow for Alternatives to Violence, and she is the CEO of Ask Alexis Coaching and Consulting, LLC.
We also have Daisy Love, Director of Music at Renaissance Unity, professional artist, Undisputed Truth, owner, director of One Rhythm Entertainment, LLC, independent filmmaker, creating platforms for young adults to open dialogue about racism and politics.
And we have Reverend Glenn, who you heard from moments ago, Reverend Glenn McIntosh, Vice President for Student Affairs and Chief Diversity Officer for Oakland University. Glenn is highly regarded as a senior level higher education administrator, human performance specialist, and inspirational speaker. His eclectic background has afforded him the opportunity to develop effective programs and services to address academic performance, mental health, crisis management, business development, and diversity and inclusion issues. Welcome.
We have Vince Orlando, an actor, writer, producer, and entrepreneur whose lifelong battle with severe PTSD led him into a spiritual awakening through ketamine psychedelic therapy, quantum physics, and the birth of his son, which has propelled him into the field of consciousness theory and trauma research as it correlates with his own personal experience.
And Lanice Whitfield, recently retired after serving over 27 years in social services, working with abused and neglected children and families, juveniles, and community development. Currently a licensed financial professional and entrepreneur, Lanice serves families through providing financial services, including credit restoration, debt elimination, identity protection, financial education, and entrepreneurship opportunities. And as a dark-skinned Black woman growing up, experiencing racism, sexism, and the effects of financial illiteracy, this has led her on the journey of healing and self-actualization. Welcome, Lanice.
And hi, everyone. My name, as Reverend Glenn introduced me, is Philip Reed. And I'm a man who shared in the common experience of trauma through racism and the common perspectives that were made and manifested as a direct result of my surroundings. And my perspective changed forever and started me down this journey when I was working as a supervisor and I blurted out a homophobic slur in front of a gay employee that was my friend, and I genuinely cared for her. And although this slip was devoid of malintent, I quickly realized at how automated and deeply ingrained these responses were. And I realized then that I had to do work and I had to change to become a better person for all.
Thank you, Bill. And lastly, I'm Angela Blanchard, moderating tonight as well. I'm an occupational therapist, promoting the hiring of individuals with disabilities. And I regularly conduct trainings for businesses that promote empathy and inclusion in the workplace. I'm a former television news reporter that worked for NBC stations in North Dakota and Alaska. And I have personally and successfully participated in treatment for complex PTSD.
So we're going right into part one. And the question that we want to ask, and we'd like to start off with Nicole, is what is trauma? Bessel, can you give us some your thoughts and to the audience? What is trauma?
Well, trauma is an experience that overwhelms you, that stops you in your shoes, and you go, oh shit. And there's really nothing you can do, and you have this feeling of complete helplessness, maybe rage, but the lack of capacity to do something, to talk back, to take action, and it goes like, oh my God. And you change because you have an experience with your own helplessness, and if this keeps going on, it starts invading more and more of your life, and you feel more and more helpless, you feel stirred up, you feel unfocused, and then you try to, your survival brain runs a show, so you do whatever you can to survive, and then you become angry and restless, and you try to fight, but nothing makes sense anymore, and then you try to focus your attention on how the hell do I make those feelings go away? And so there's feelings of helplessness and despair just then causes people to do all kinds of things, to like taking drugs and taking substances and doing things to their bodies to somehow in some way get back some control over your own mind. So basically, when you get traumatized, you lose your mind. And a very important part of overcoming trauma is to regain your mind and regain your sense of agency, that there's something I can do to affect my life. It's so nice to hear all of your introductions, because all of you are doing something to help people to take action to be in charge of their lives. So that's very, very central to overcoming trauma.
Want to talk about relationships?
Look at
No.
Dr. Vanderkolk, what are some of the signs that someone has experienced trauma?
the signs are that in response to relatively minor things, you have extraordinary reactions. Like something minor happens and you blow up, or something minor happens and you shut down. Something minor happens and you become very aggressive, or that somehow you find yourself responding in a way that doesn't make sense, doesn't make sense to you either, doesn't make sense for the people around you, and because you keep doing things and behaving things and feeling things that don't make sense, you become more and more ashamed about who you are, and you get this very deep sense of internal defectiveness. There's something wrong with me. I'm a wrong person. I'm a bad person. And so when bad things start happening to you at this point, you think, I'm a bad person. I deserve this because I've done so many out of control things by now that it's no wonder that this keeps happening to me.
So it's possible then that somebody could experience trauma or have even symptoms of post-traumatic stress and maybe not even realize it themselves. That's what it's
All the time. People have symptoms. It's not like, oh, I blow up at somebody and say, oh, I'm blowing up to this person because he reminds me of my dad or he reminds me of somebody else. You blow up. You don't know where it comes from. And so it's only when you start doing therapy or start reading books that you go, oh, the way I feel is related to something that happened to me. And making that connection is helpful. It's not the end of the story, but knowing that, oh, I feel this way because my dad always put me down or my mom was too drunk to take care of me. Oh, now I understand how I got to feel this way. And once you get a sense of where it comes from, you might have some handle on what you might do to take care of it. But initially, I don't think anybody starts off looking for help or treatment by saying, oh, I was molested, I was beaten up. I do crazy things. My life isn't working for me. I can't get close to people. When somebody touches me, I freak out. And I know on some level that he doesn't mean it badly, but I behave that way. But most people are not aware of where it comes from.
So, Bessel, all reactions aren't necessarily going to potentially be as strong as some of the ones you just named. Can you give some maybe minor reactions that still people should look out for in themselves?
Well, the minor reactions are that you know that you cannot handle the situation, so you start avoiding it. For example, when you feel bad about yourself and you start hating yourself when something doesn't go right, you may not apply for a job because you say, I will fail anyway. Or when somebody hurts you, you won't say, hey, that wasn't right, because you have given up on being able to stand up for yourself. And so you lead a life of trying to hold your head down and try to make sure that other people don't do anything bad to you, but not only other people, but that you don't get out of control.
And what are some of the common causes of trauma? What are some of the most common causes of trauma?
I think the most common cause of trauma starts in the family. And that's the huge issue of intergenerational transmission of trauma. If your parents have been beaten up, terrible things have been done to them, that really interferes with your capacity to just put up with the crying of a baby or with people waking up in the middle of the night. And so you tend to get triggered by that little baby. And so it becomes hard to just say, oh, it's a little baby, let me just pick it up, because your reactions are too intense. And for most people, trauma starts in the family with people who already have been traumatized. and the trauma continues in the family, and then it starts coming outside. But so, what's the common cause of trauma after that? Sexual molestation, humiliation, being beaten up, being bullied, being humiliated, stuff like that.
Do you see trauma then passed along from generation to generation at times?
Very much so. Trauma is passed on from generation to generation, and until you become conscious of it, it will continue. So it's very important for all of us, and that's why I'm so delighted to be with you guys, because clearly you as a congregation have taken it upon yourself to look at stuff, and not only look at other people, but look at yourself as well. And the end of trauma starts with a consciousness of, I am doing something that isn't right, or I have reactions that I shouldn't be having, and that you really allow yourself to know that something isn't working, and you start really thinking about what it is that causes me to hurt myself, causes me to hurt other people, causes me to think that I love my kids, but I hurt my kids instead. It starts off with consciousness. And so that's why I think a group like yours is sort of my dream, because, see, I'm a shrink. Huh? I'm a psychiatrist. I started off being a psychopharmacologist. I gave people drugs because they were doing crazy things. And then slowly I realized that no, people do these things because something happened to them, and these drugs don't fix it. But at the same time, it's very important to know the origin of this field comes from feminism. It comes from women like Eve Ensler and Judy Herman and people like that, and some of the writers getting together and talking about trauma. And it started off as a peer support, that women started together and started to talk to each other. And people of color started to come together and talk to each other. And it started off indeed as a peer support system where people could examine themselves in groups and really look at themselves and set up a community of people with whom they could investigate. And an early origin is also the 12-step programs. Same thing. We are messed up and we need to do something about it. So it came out of people finding words. And then after that, it became professionalized. And then, so something happened, and I'm so delighted you guys are moving in a different direction, that now you know you're messed up, so you go to a social worker to solve your problems. That's not how we started. We started off going to peers, to other women, other people, other soldiers, other indigenous populations, other people of color with whom I could talk about my internal experience. So I think you guys, to my mind, are going in completely the right direction in terms of helping people to break the cycles of violence.
So it sounds like people who experience trauma move through the world feeling unsafe or like they don't belong. Can you speak to that some?
Oh, absolutely. So what happens, and that's where the neuroscience piece comes in, that really helped us to understand it much better. Once we started to study what happens in the brain, you see that the part of your brain that is involved in survival really wants to show. So you always feel unsafe, you always feel angry. It's not only that you're a victim, but you live in a dangerous world, so you do terrible things to other people. It goes both ways. And so, but you live with that sense of, I'm in danger, so I need to hide myself. I'm in danger because I need to fight back. And people don't think about it. These are automatic reactions. And also, I'm in danger, and when I meet you, I better hit you before you hit me. And so these are not rational processes. Your whole rational brain is not playing a role in this. And in order to get in charge of yourself, you need to get that mindful brain online.
Well, Vince, You look like you wanted to respond, and then I see we'll move around. So Vince, I'd like to give you a couple minutes to respond, please.
First off, Bessel, I want to thank you for the book, and both you and Lisha for being on and the work you continue to do in trauma. Because I lived, like you said, my entire life. I didn't know what was going on. I thought I was a tough guy. I wasn't. I was scared, and it all goes back now. It all makes sense, but until I stumbled onto somebody who actually diagnosed me with PTSD and can explain the patterns to me, that's the first time I really understood myself. So that was like 2013. The first episode I ever had that was visible was 2004. So this is, it's been for a while. And then, and I just want to speed forward to your book. So from 2013 till now, somehow I developed an innate sense of what was going on. I could feel the mechanisms working. I stumbled on the cognitive processing therapy, and that really saved my life. That was a game changer. And then I said, okay, I think I'm safe enough to go out and speak about this. So I started a podcast called The Human Condition. And then on that podcast, I was given your book. And your book, it was like a bunch of puzzle pieces coming together. Like, it was me, the puzzle. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's me. And I'm reading your book, and I'm like, it was a guidebook, right? It really validated what I was feeling. And like you said, it made me feel safe. But one of the things that it really did is it led me to this epiphany that there's a common field that all human beings occupy together, and it's trauma. It's a traumatic experience, and the trauma doesn't have to be bad, right? It can be good if it's a learned experience, but we all occupy that. And then I started thinking, George Floyd happened, and then we all came together on this, and it was almost immediate. Oh yeah, no, that's this. And if we can remove the triggers, all you have to do is say racism and people get triggered. So how do you speak past the triggers? You can't, like you said in your book, when you get to that point, you're just not even getting into the neocortex, right? So it's been a complete game changer. It's been unifying. My ability to understand my mechanisms has led me to understanding others' mechanisms. I know when to jump out of a conversation because we're there. We can't go any further. And I just, for me, trauma, I just want to, it's a metaphysical metaphor. I look at it kind of like from a Buddhist interpretation where, pain is necessary, suffering is optional. And I see trauma as the necessary pain in life. And then, I developed PTSD. That was my inability to process through the trauma healthily. And I think that's where we are now in this conversation on racism. One of the most difficult conversations you're going to have in America today. If we can work through this, I think we can work through pretty much anything.
Well, I want to say two things about what you said. One is that you talk about, I read your book, my book is a really tough book. And if you're traumatized, to make it through one chapter after another, everybody who I think makes it from chapter 1 to chapter 21, I go like, how the hell did you do that? Because, when you're traumatized, you get triggered. Somebody who I won't mention, but she may be able to talk about herself. When she first read one of her chapters, she slept for 48 hours.
Oh.
Because it's tough. And confronting all that stuff is really difficult. And confronting what happened to George Floyd is really difficult. And really look at that movie and go like, holy shit, look what that guy went through. And what we generally do is we look at it and we start talking about something else because it's just too painful. So it takes an enormous amount of guts to actually confront this, and I think one of the things that really helps people is exactly what you guys are doing, is to support each other in reading it. I don't know how you did it, but reading it by yourself, confronting your trauma is really difficult.
I was faced with do it or die,
Yeah.
So now it's exciting to me. The more I learn, the better I get. So I've kind of confronted that. So I was different going into your book than maybe 10 years ago,
Right.
but it was more exciting for me than anything. And it was also exhausting,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and everyone here read your book, Dr. Vanderkolk.
Right. I'm so impressed.
Yes, so I know everyone had different experiences here. And Alexis has it right there. Alexis, I know you wanted to join in next and by all means, go ahead.
So first, I want to say I was very impressed when I read the book, and also thank you so much for admitting that it was tough, because it was just kind of reaffirming. This is the second. I was able to get through it, but this was my second attempt at getting through it. So I appreciate the context in which you discuss this cycle of trauma activation and all of the different effects and the internalized shame and the self-limiting behavior and restricting opportunities and the different ways that trauma may play out. But I'm an allyship, I teach allyship, but I also am an anti-racism educator, and I cannot help but see it through the lens of my lived experience of systemic oppression and the intergenerational trauma that shows up along with that. And so what I want to make sure that the audience understands about systemic oppression as it relates to trauma is that there is not time to turn down your response. So there are many people, depending on what they have been through, who experience life daily with their systems activated, and they don't have the tools or the language to discuss it, to live it. But then that creates a cultural image and biases and stereotypes, and is used to further this cycle. So I guess my question is, what can we do with this information to help people to understand that some of these responses, people who have lived with marginalized identities, live like this all the time, and some of these responses show up in the workplace. Some of these responses show up in interpersonal relationships. Some of these responses show up in education as it relates to like being the student showing like for class. How do we turn this around? Because right now we're creating more and more traumatized people.
Yeah. Well, to my mind, and you have to understand, I come from a particular position. I'm a psychiatrist, I'm an academic, and I come from a particular world. That's my world. Huh? And so my perspective is biased to me, as all of our biases. And to my mind, the critical issue is to learn to observe without reacting, and to become, people use the word mindfulness these days, is to really learn to know your internal reactions and to develop a sense of compassion for your responses. Because you'll meet some asshole somewhere who will insult you, and the next thing is you are enraged or you are shut down, and that's the end of the story. And so it is very important to learn, like, boy, this guy is a terrible person, and I'm not. And I'm not going to activate my mirror neuron system to respond the way that person responds to me. I worked with the Truth Commission in South Africa, and I met this work with Nelson Mandela and Tutu. They were the exemplars of that. They were astonishing people. I'd never seen anything like it. They were chronically abused, chronically humiliated, and they kept their mind about it and said, this guy is a troubled person who hates black people, but I don't own what this person is doing to me. And so I don't know how the hell they did it, but they developed this capacity to go like, okay, that's what you see, that's what you know, but it's not how it is. So they kept that mindfulness. And I think the healing from trauma really comes, first of all, that you learn to observe without reacting. And so a lot of people come through trauma by doing yoga, doing martial arts, doing singing, doing movement, doing dancing. It's all kind of, when you travel around the world, what's interesting to see is that the American system is sort of, we are a weird culture actually. I mean, we think we're the standard of the world, but anywhere else in the world, when people get traumatized, they move, they dance, they sing. We don't do that. Black churches do that.
I would like to actually say something.
And Alicia would like to say something because she has a different perspective.
I have a little different perspective than Bessel because I experienced racism, and intergenerationally, I have the trauma of the Black people in my family passed down to me through my father, and Japanese people through my mother. So my understanding of racism and as trauma is that the racist experiences that my family had, that my ancestors had, that my parents had, and that I have experienced, it's an existential threat. And that the things that happen and opportunities that, like, maybe Bessel and I will go for a walk and we'll see a no trespassing sign, and he'll walk right past it as if it's not for him. And I stop because I know that I could die if I walk across that line. And there's a way that it's a trauma that white people have the privilege of not seeing or not acknowledging, that's constantly there. It's the threat of death. It's an existential threat. And so there are many things that we culturally, without having it spoken to us, we learn that we have a place that's safe and a place that's not safe. And there are many more places in a person of color or a marginalized identity don't have those safe places, where white people or cisgendered people have a way of moving through the world knowing that their safer places are much bigger without the threat of death. So I think to have this conversation about what you change, it might be who raises their hand in school, who's ready to ask the boss for a raise without being afraid that they're going to be fired for asking for the raise. That kind of, those are all things that have to do with your ability to survive. And what Bessel's saying about mindfulness and noticing where your reactivity is, I noticed that I have a lot of reactivity about things that maybe everybody else around me is thinking is just a normal thing, and I'm not sure what's the safe option for me. And
But it's complicated. In that there is no question that if a cop stops me in the street and he's nasty to me, I go, this guy's a troubled guy, and I stay calm. And nobody like me has been killed by a cop for a very long time. So I don't go like, oh my God, my life is in danger. But I think to myself, oh, I better be careful with this guy. So, but I'm calm and I can suck up to him. But if my reaction is like, oh my God, I'm going to get killed, I will become reactive. And I'll trigger that guy to become more reactive. And before the whole thing is done. So it's also an interaction. That once you learn to be really calm, like Martin Luther King was able to do, but we aren't Martin Luther King. You know, these are exceptional people. They can actually meet danger without getting freaked out. But I do not expect it from everybody. And I don't expect it from you. I hope you'll get there. Yeah?
Alexis, did I take us on a tangent that was too far?
No, it's great.
No, absolutely.
Relevant.
That is exactly the direction we're heading in. We do have a poll question for our audience. Have you ever felt trauma as a result of racism? And we're going to show those results to our audience shortly.
Mm.
So no, we have segued perfectly into our second topic here, or our segue into our next topic.
Hosts and panelists can, yeah.
So before we go any further, we did have a question from the audience, and this came from Shirley at 727. And she asked, are homelessness, war, or witnessing violence and food insecurity causes of trauma as well?
Oh, homelessness is unspeakable. You know, we live with homelessness, we see it, and And even you guys who are thoughtful, you probably pass by it and you are able to dissociate. Not every homeless person probably makes you pull out your wallet and give them a lot of money. But homelessness is a terrible thing to happen to people. Being hungry, being a parent and not being able to feed your children, it's a terrible thing for people. You know, it should not happen. The richest country in the world that we tolerate is just unspeakable.
So, Daisy, I know you wanted to chime in. When you hear these things, when you hear we started talking about trauma, how it shows up, what are the effects, all of these things. What would you like to add to this conversation in regard to?
Well, I was thinking in terms of young children because my first experience that I can really remember with trauma in terms of racism was I was bused to all-white school from the city of Detroit into the suburbs. And when I got there, I noticed everything was separate. You know, Black kids, white kids, we were all separated. And I can't remember the incident that got me locked in the closet, but the teacher locked me in the closet, literally pulling my hair and dragging me into the closet. And I was too afraid to tell my mother because I didn't want to get a whooping. But that situation, it never left me. It never left me. And so I didn't really know how to deal with it when I was a kid and then being afraid and want to tell mom. Growing up, I experienced other things. And in my household, I understood that we had a really Black, proud family. And my mother was kind of militant, which was good because it taught me some things. But as I got older, I understood that the world was changing and I had to change with the world, meaning I had to learn how to evolve and become one with the whole human race versus just the Black race for my experience.
But you can't do that when people lock you in the closet.
Sorry, say that again.
How can you become a normal, regular human being if people lock you in the closet, you know?
Well, that's one of the reactions is to dismiss it. So I dismissed it. I dismissed it as, you know, really not, for me, I didn't want to get in trouble. So that was how I was able to let it go as a kid. But as I got older, I understood that that was wrong. But I did understand that there were good people and there were bad people. And I just had experienced a bad person that day. You get what I'm saying? So I knew as I grew older, I knew how to differentiate between good and bad. And that's how I lived my life in looking at things as good or bad and trying to become a part of a community like Renaissance Unity, no plug intended, but like Renaissance Unity with people who had the same ideas and the same thought process.
Right.
And that helped me grow so that even though there's racism in the world, I feel like it's part of my responsibility to help someone else get over their trauma that they've experienced in their life, however I can, even if it's leading them into someone's hands that can help get them to a better place. I was very impressed with the book. I'm gonna tell you today and yesterday, I binged it. For the last 2 days, I've been listening to that book and it just blew me away because I was not expecting what I got. And at first I was emotionally hit, especially when you guys started talking about the part with children, because I understand that children don't necessarily know how to use their voice to speak what's hurting them.
No.
My granddaughter came to me and told me about George Floyd, and at the time she was 9 years old. And when she told me, she was like, "Grandma, have you seen the video?" And I was like, "No, what video? What video?" I blew her off for 2 days. And then because I knew it was hard, her expression to me told me that it was something hard. So I just kind of like hugged her when she told me. But for young people to have to deal with that is huge. How do we start incorporating that into to our youth? How do we start helping our young people so that they don't become the abuser? You get what I'm saying? Or how do we help them?
See, I learned everything that I know from my patients and myself, of course, my own experience.
Yes.
So the answer is inside of you. You got locked up and you found a voice for yourself. And then my question is, how did you do that?
How did I do it?
And so you gave us a little bit of a clue. You said, I found a community of people who gave me a voice.
Yes.
And I think that's a very important step. It's not enough.
Yes.
It's a very important part.
Yes.
That you can really say, this is what happened to me. What is your experience? And the people acknowledge the reality of what happens. That's where you start. Because, so many people are in denial, and I've dealt with it many times in my life. Oh, slavery is over. Let's not talk about it. The pre-sexual abuse. Oh, you're just making it up. Oh, you go to a psychiatrist and say, oh no, it's not your whatever. It is, you have a bipolar disorder. You need a drug. And so being able to say what goes on with you and say, this is my reality, and finding words for it is a critically important thing. And communities like yours and the arts and Toni Morrison and Oprah Winfrey and terribly important, because that allows us to be able to say, this is what is happening. And that's very important.
So Julie, I know that you wanted to jump in right quick. If you would, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just an incredible conversation so far. The thing that I wanted to say was, I hear from a lot of different people that I work with and people that I know about when you ask somebody, you're going through your typical get to know you kind of things. And you may ask somebody, have you experienced trauma? And most people will say no. And it's really, really fascinating. And so oftentimes, when I'm working with people, when I'm talking with people, I have to shift how I'm asking this, because you don't get a lot of information sometimes when you say, have you had trauma? And one of the things I can find is that people compare trauma. So they may say, if it wasn't physical violence, it wasn't sexual violence, then I don't have any trauma. And I so appreciate this conversation, because what we're talking about is systemic trauma. We're talking about personal racism trauma. It really extends the conversation so much bigger, because trauma is not how we all think of it in our minds. It's really our response, where we're at the time, and our response to what's happening around us. And so that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Julie. I mean, that goes right into the
I'd like to respond to what Julie says. Like, I could imagine Daisy saying, having said at some point in her life, oh, I went to this mainly white school, I was being bused there, how was it? And her saying, it was fine. And not talking about you're being locked in a closet. And what I do is go after the details. And I go, oh, good, glad you had a good time. And so, what was it like for you to be one of the 3 black kids in that class? And people say it was fine. And was there anything that happened that made you feel different from other people? I always go for the details. I never ask people about their trauma, actually. As you know from the book, I say, truth, like love and sleep, resents approaches that are too intense. So you need to be sneaky about it. Say, so what was it like to sit in that school bus? What was it like to have everybody in the school being dropped off by their own parents, but you get off the school bus by yourself as a kid who's being imported from somewhere else? And you go into the details, and God is in the details. And the issue is also, you don't really want to remember how terrible you felt. And so people don't want to remember their trauma. And that's where ketamine comes in and psychedelics come in, because there is something about those drugs and hypnosis and some other things that allow you to just meet yourself. And your defenses aren't there, and all kind of stuff that you thought was perfectly all right and didn't bother you, you go like, man, that's just hard. And what you develop at this point is the critical issue, and that is self-compassion. Because when you get locked up as the one kid in school, you say, this is happening because I'm a bad kid. Probably. You're not 6 years old, you get locked in a closet and say, I'm a really good kid, but I'm brown, and it's unjust that people get locked up. No, as a little kid, you go, cause and effect is very simple. You go, I get locked up because I'm a bad kid. And that feeling of I'm a bad kid stays with you until something else can sort of reorganize that. And it's not until you feel safe to really meet yourself back there again says, that was amazing. It's amazing what that kid went through, you know? And because you cannot tell the story initially because it's too painful to tell all that stuff. So all of us make up a cover story, you know? And that's what you do when you do trauma work. People come in and they say, oh, blah, just give me a pill or something. And then before too long, you discover that people have had extremely complex lives. And they need to own themselves. And they need to say, this is what I went through. And wow, it's amazing that I came out okay. And then you really need to get that sense of compassion and amazement, but wow, that happened to me. Oh, and I'm still here, able to tell the story. You know, but opening people up to that degree of self-acceptance, self-compassion is a very complex phenomenon. And I really trust again that your community really helps people to really see themselves from I'm defective and I'm fucked up to wow, I went through this. That's amazing.
Excellent point. And moments ago, we had asked our audience, perhaps we should have been sneakier with our question, but we said, have you ever felt trauma as a result of racism? And we found 47% of people said yes, and 53% of people said no. So you can see there it's split about 50-50. And later on, we're going to see if maybe those numbers will change when we talk a little bit more about that. But I wanted to really pose the same question to the panelists here because we did read the book. So we can answer that question. Have you ever felt that? And have you ever felt trauma as a result of racism? Or would you like to share a story as we have been talking about this for the last several months?
Okay.
Lanice, I'd like to go to you and hear from you. I know you wanted to add something.
Yes, thank you, Angie. Just thanking you so much, Bessel, for being here. I've always experienced, I would call it a daily low-grade trauma. Like if you would have asked me that question, before this past year, I would have said no on some levels as well, that I hadn't experienced trauma. I haven't experienced any sexual abuse or physical abuse or anything like that, or traumatic things that you would think of. But I often experience feeling unsafe, feeling like I'm not good enough as a Black woman, feeling that nobody kind of has my back. And that is a daily thing of you're censoring your behavior, you're censoring your reactions, to different things. You go to a store and walk in a store and you're followed, so it's a daily thing, and it's been all of my life. And at a young age, my parents had to have the conversations with me about being a Black person and what that meant when I went to a certain neighborhood, what that meant, when I'm in a certain environment, and how to conduct myself. So I have experienced a tremendous amount of trauma, but it has always been in my community that it's not seen as, it's seen as normal. It's seen as normal that you have to be superhuman. You have to know how to deal with it and, not get out of hand. So I want you to kind of speak to that on that daily kind of low grade trauma that we experience.
Well, I think you said it. No, I cannot improve on what you said. You get trained to keep your head down. You get trained that people are suspicious of you. You're trained that people think that you're going to do terrible things and that you need to be treated harshly lest you explode and do something terrible. And that becomes your whole orientation to life. And then you go to maybe to Hawaii, which is not as racist as the rest of the US, or you go maybe to Norway, which may not be as, and then suddenly you go, hey, I feel like a different person. I don't get all the same reactions I always get. And you go like, wow, this is weird. I don't recognize myself. And, you know, but I think what you say, how you started off, that it becomes a way of being in the world. And I'm always astounded by people who actually make their way out of that world that they were trained in. Don't you ever get out of that, you know? You go like, I'm okay.
It is a tough thing to do, Bessel, and that is something, and we appreciate that, anyone who has been through some of those things. Vince, I know that you wanted to respond, so I'd like to give you the opportunity to step in.
Yeah, well, I can relate fully to that hypervigilance that you speak of from a different experience. Mine wasn't as a result of racism and poor, abused. So I felt less than all the time, you know, and it took a lot to took a lot of work. I had to face some things and it wasn't comfortable. But this goes back to Alexa's point and then Lisha's. We have to, trauma's never going to get dealt with unless it gets dealt with. Can't be swept under the rug, can't be denied. And if we don't open the conversation to, there's a difference of experience in this country dating back to hundreds of years, which people don't want to talk about. They live in their defense mechanism. So it's no, deny.
Yeah.
And then we don't get anywhere. And Black people in America are being called upon to be Martin Luther King, every one of them. And that's not fair. You know what I mean? So we got to step up and we got to create this safe space. We all got to work together. It's not going to happen. If we separate to try to do this thing, not happening. It's not happening. So if we don't come together and create a safe space where these conversations can happen and then we can take action, I'm not going to say we're screwed because we're not, because we're doing it.
Well, you know, it is so complex. Let me give you an example, my association with what you say. I went to medical school at the University of Chicago, on the south side of Chicago. And I came from Hawaii, where I actually was the successor of Barack Obama's father as the president of the Foreign Student Association. And so I came from Hawaii to Chicago, and I suddenly see this unbelievable racism and danger and fear all around me. And I woke up to a whole different world. Last year, I went back to the University of Chicago as a visiting professor after 40 years after graduating from medical school. And the university has done spectacular. They have cyclotrons and they have great instruments and good stuff. The south side of Chicago is unchanged. In 40 years, it is just as miserable as it ever was. And you go like, wow, with 40 years of what we have gone through, that nothing has changed. Yeah. And you go like, this is such a gigantic problem. And Michelle Obama was the community person for the University of Chicago. She didn't do anything, as far as I can see, with all respect to Michelle Obama. But the problem is so gigantic, you know. And how do you help people to, how do you help people to really open things up, you know? And
Well,
it's huge. It's huge. Yeah.
One thing that your group is modeling is allyship. You know, I think that it's everybody who comes to a conversation like this is really vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I see the respect that you hold for each other, and the tone that you have is modeling something that not many people have as an example of this kind of courage and this kind of respect across cultural lines, across racial lines, across sexual orientation lines. And that foundation that you have is what makes change possible, because it makes it safe to look at the things that are invisible, that can trigger our shame as victims as being marginalized, our shame as being perpetrators when we are in positions where we've hurt people unwittingly or consciously. To be able to own that it takes a tremendous level of mutual vulnerability and compassion and respect. And I see that with your group. I'm so grateful for how you've come together in this way. And this experience of having that safety, most of us don't grow up with it. Most of us don't have it outside of our neighborhoods, outside of our small circles of friends. So many of us don't have it in our families. And it's a culture to foster that I think is really important. And you know, lots of people don't have it in their therapeutic relationships, don't know how to make this conversation safe. So
thank you, Alicia, for noticing that our spiritual community really has developed that sense of safety or has worked on that. And then this group dug even deeper. I'd like to move on to Alexis. I know Alexis wanted to respond, and then we're going to follow up with a question. And that question, I'll have you start thinking about it. But what does trauma feel like in the body? Where is it stored in the body and the brain? And specifically, what does the experience of racism as a trauma feel like in the body and the brain? But first, I'd like to go back to Alexis here and go ahead.
I just wanted to take the time because this is Renaissance Unity and we are metaphysicians. We believe we have come to this moment now. So I want to harness this energy and focus it towards solutions in a shared and inclusive future. And I know that, excuse me, this wasn't planned, but some things that you can do is uplift marginalized voices. Be encouraging, because you hear some of these traumatic responses. If you see someone having one, you can be an ally for them. And though I definitely am an anti-racism educator, I teach allyship and doing that inner work to begin to be an ally. Ally is the first step. You can go to co-conspirator too and begin to actively work to dismantle systems of oppression. Otherwise, we will, just like Bessel said, 40 years later, healing all the people who have been affected does nothing if we don't heal the victimizers too, or the system that victimizes and churns people. So I don't want to, we don't have to just stay in a reactionary state approaching this problem. We can begin to create a society and design it for inclusion rather than just retrofitting against the discrimination in the way that it was originally intended. And I'd like to take the time to have the audience think about ways that they could do that. Think about ways that they could vote for a more trauma-informed society, that they could, what nonprofits they could invest in, different charitable activities, questions that they could ask, or courses that they could take, because I have a course that I teach, but I also know many other people who teach you how to become an ally, because it is a skill set and a new identity. And we do teach you mindfulness, and because I believe that the victimizer needs those mindfulness practices in order for this to stop, even more than the victim. So I think that to me, there's this, yes, we need to heal people who've been victimized, but to me, the approach needs to really shift on healing the victimizers.
yes.
You're so moderate.
Excellent point,
Can
Alexis.
I say something? Yeah, you're such a moderate person, because if you really face it, you start off with the school systems. And as I say at the end of my book, your zip code is a better predictor of long-term problems than your genetic code. And so you need to have much more radical solutions. And that is that every school program is not financed by the local community, not financed by it, maybe run by it, but not financed by it. So that if you come from a wealthy community, you have a wealthy school system. And if you're a poor community, you end up in a lousy school system. And indeed, some people come out of the lousy school system, but you need to be 10 times as brilliant to get out of these lousy school systems than if you're a regular kid in Brookline, Massachusetts. So there are some very core surgically necessary things in our society to begin to give people equal opportunities, and we are nowhere. What's the whole thing with why don't we have universal health care in America? Because of racism. You know, I grew up in Holland, where basically everybody used to have blue eyes, and if people say, "Oh, let's give health care to everybody," you go like, "Sure," because those kids over there have the same blue eyes as I do. In America, you go, "I'm not going to give health care to those people who look different from me," and that's why we are the only country in the world that still doesn't have universal health care. It's based on racism, you know, and you better be articulate about that, you know.
So, yeah, thank you for that, Bessel. Before we move on, we wanted to go to Alicia's exercise, but I wanted to give a few points of reference. So when we talk about the traumatic experience of racism, and we talked earlier about how the people who are faced with racism are affected traumatically, it also affects people from other angles as well. Like when you see potentially let's say a Caucasian woman in an elevator, and she sees a young Black male get in the elevator, you know, sometimes that immediately rushes to her brain. You know what? I need to protect my purse, or I'm super scared. That is a traumatic response.
Mhm.
There are all kinds of responses that are traumatic on both ends of the table that people don't necessarily think about, but it is trauma, and it's trauma that's ingrained in us.
Yeah.
Just from societal, unfortunately, societal norms and the thoughts that, you know, that are given to people in society. So I did want to kind of talk about that briefly, just because we haven't had the opportunity to bring that up really. And I know that we're getting ready to move on to Alicia's exercise, because we are getting close to that time in the program.
So we'll turn that over to you, Lisha, to begin this experiential activity.
Yeah, but did you want to have Bessel answer that, Phil?
I'd be happy to have
Yeah.
Bessel answer that, and then we
Well,
can.
see, there's another aspect to that. You know, I'm old enough to know about the Black Panthers and stuff like that. They were really very much into empowering their communities. And if a Black woman has taken a karate, if a white woman would have taken a karate course, she wouldn't go in the elevator and say, "This guy is going to hurt me," because she would know that I can defend myself. And so a very important part of dealing with all this stuff is learning your own power. And, you know, that's what the Black Panthers were into a long time ago. I don't see much of it anymore. Like, I have a dream that I'm still working on, and that is that, you know, a lot of kids come to school of all races after seeing a lot of family violence. We can quiet people's brains down with something called neurofeedback. I'd like to get neurofeedback in every school in America, so that if you just have seen family violence and people beating each other up, you can calm your brain down so you can actually focus and look and not be run by that terrified brain. Because if you're consistently exposed to violence, you are living in a brain that is programmed for violence. And of course, you need to help program people's minds to actually have a mind that's focused on safety and to be able to go into danger if you need it. And, you know, part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you guys, because I'm really sort of on a mission that it becomes part of our public health, school systems, churches, that we teach people how do you make your body feel safe and how you're able to move from having a safe body into being able to fight for yourself and stand up for yourself. And when you have a feeling in your body, I have enough power to protect myself. And so it is not simply political action. You also need to really teach people on a very deep level how to be very still and how to be focused and become a little bit like Bishop Tutu, and to also become like Muhammad Ali has said, "I'm the toughest guy in the world, and if you want to mess with me, I can take care of it." Both at the same time. Yeah.
Thank you, Bessel, for that response.
Thank you.
Leisha, we'd like to turn it over to you.
Sure. So I'm going to start with that first question that I heard when this session started, which was, what does a traumatized body feel like? What happens when your body is in trauma? And I think that many of us aren't aware enough of our bodies to know when we're having those responses. So we might be holding our breath and not know we're holding our breath. Our shoulders might be tight and we might not know that our habitual pattern of moving through the world is, I got to keep my shoulders straight. I got to keep my eyes forward. That we have patterns and habits of how we hold our bodies. And when we're in a safe space, we might be loose, we might be able to laugh, we might be able to have a lot of fun. But if we're mice that are playing and somebody drops a cat hair in our pen, we're all going to freeze. Our hearts are going to get fast. We're going to hold our breath. We're going to our nervous systems activate to either make us run or fight, or else we shut down and collapse and freeze and hope that nobody sees us. So those are the responses that we can be having, and maybe they're not big explosive responses that everybody's going to notice, but maybe your response in trauma is that you just make yourself a little bit smaller and a little bit quieter, and you make sure that you back away and you don't say anything that's going to make whatever danger you're close to get worse. So our responses to trauma, our traumatized bodies are hypersensitive to how close or how far away we are to dangerous things, to threats in our environment. Just like I was talking about me stopping at the no trespassing sign, there are plenty of things like that where I'll stop. I was riding bicycles one day in a neighborhood on Cape Cod with Bessel, and I felt like a car was a little bit too close behind me, and it made me stop. And Bessel said, "Why are you stopping?" And I pulled over to the side of the road, and a woman threatened to call the police on me because I was in the wrong neighborhood. And he'd never seen that before, but it happens all the time. So my sixth sense, my body, is attenuated in a different way to the signals of danger in my environment. And so what I have to be aware of is not just, oh, I'm noticing danger, but am I gonna flip my lid? Am I gonna explode? Am I gonna fight? Am I gonna yell? Am I gonna collapse? Or can I stay present in the moment? Can I stay calm and present in the moment? What is my body doing? What is my nervous system doing? How am I breathing? So the first thing to do when you're noticing your environment is, how am I breathing? We're all sitting in chairs now. What does it feel like to sit in this chair? What part of my body is holding tension right now? And is there anything that wants to relax? What can I relax? Can I push my feet into the floor and feel my feet? Can I feel the bottoms of my feet making contact with the floor through my shoes or through my socks? What's happening in the room around me? How big or small does the room feel? Sometimes when we're frightened, everything gets really tight and close around us, and maybe we're in an elevator with somebody who makes us uncomfortable. What's it like to be fully in an elevator in my body and be okay? What does it feel like to be okay and take space here and stay in that calm zone where I'm still breathing the way I want to breathe, where my heart isn't racing? Or if my heart is racing, how can I exhale slowly enough that my feet make contact with the floor again? How can I exhale slowly enough that I can feel my heartbeat slowing down again? And I can feel my neck and my head and my back. So I'm going to invite you to notice what you feel like in your body right now. What's been working too hard? What's been tight? What's been feeling okay or good? And that awareness, it's a subtle thing that we kind of know all the time, but we might be engaging with other people, we might be working, and we might not know how safe or how not safe we feel. We might not notice that in our office with some people, we're not as comfortable as with other people. We might not notice consciously that, wow, the reason I don't like walking past this store is because something's happening that doesn't feel safe. But I hope that you're all feeling safe in the spaces that you're in now. And I invite you to notice, what are some of the things around you that give you comfort in the space that you're in this moment. So I'm going to invite you to just look around the space that you're in. Don't look at me. Maybe look away from the screen. A lot of us look at screens an awful lot. But I invite you to let your eyes wander. And as your eyes wander, I invite you to allow your head to follow your eyes. And I invite you to allow your torso and your spine to twist. And I invite you to allow your body to follow your eyes. And notice how high the ceiling is above your head, how far the walls are away from you on either side and in front of you, past your computer screen to behind you. And notice what it feels like to feel yourself twist and stretch a little bit. Sometimes when we stare at a screen, we're so still that things can forget to move that just naturally would be moving. I invite you to say hello to your elbows, maybe send them up to the ceiling, maybe give yourself a little stretch. I know we're supposed to be very staid and proper and not move, but I'm inviting you to just let your elbows move and let your fingers spread out. And I invite you to see, when you spread out your fingers and twirl your wrists a little bit, can you feel the air moving across your hands? What kind of subtle awareness can you have? Can you really notice that? I've got my sleeves pushed up because I actually like the feeling of noticing the sensation of air moving across my arms. And it might be so subtle that you might think you're just imagining it. But this is a kind of presence and awareness in our body that we don't take the time to have all the time. But it's really nice to notice, oh, my neck needs to move a little. Oh, it hasn't moved. Wow, I can feel, when I move my head, I can feel that movement all the way down my back. That's the kind of stuff that we don't take the time to do. It's not just exercise or yoga in a certain way. It's just a way of being present and just noticing. So I'm just going to invite you to have that as a practice that you can take home with you, just a moment of awareness of the space around you, of orienting. Notice what feels safe and comforting to you. Notice when you're walking in your neighborhood, what are the signals of danger in my body? How do I calm myself down? And I offer that long out breaths are a way to slow a beat of a heart. Sometimes our heart can start racing fast in a split second. Boom, 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 boom. And suddenly we're not breathing. So I invite you to take a breath in with me through your nose. And I'm going to invite you, muted, to hold a long sound out. Or an F breath. That's where you purse your lips like you're going to blow out a candle across the room. When we exhale with a little bit of pressure or a little bit of voice, we tend to be able to exhale for longer. I can sing a note for a really long time, much longer than I can exhale silently. There's a way that we hold ourselves, we give ourselves a little internal hug without anybody seeing when we blow against pressure. When we make that F sound, that helps us to exhale for longer. When we say blow off steam, usually people are making that sound. And that steam that we're blowing off, that heat that we're blowing off, is a way to cool down and calm down an aroused body. So I think I'll just leave it with that. I have videos for calming and meditation and self-awareness on the Trauma Research Foundation website that you could access, and they're all free. You just put in your email and
Of the resources.
And it's under the resources bar of the Trauma Research Foundation website. It's called TRF Tuesdays. And there are lots of different people leading breathing exercises and movement exercises and meditation exercises. And yeah, so thank you so much for.
Thank you for that,
Yeah.
Lisha. I feel calmer already. Thank you so much. As somebody who has, again, participated in therapy for PTSD and experienced trauma, I have to say that body experience is just equally as important. I'm a yoga instructor now as well. So yoga, meditation, even just sometimes feeling my feet on the ground or looking around the room and saying, I'm wearing a blue sweater, the wall is gray, things like that. I'm drinking hot tea, and feeling that really deeply in my body has been, equally, if not as or more important or equally important as participating in therapy. So I do want to move to our follow-up poll question. So if you've been listening to this conversation, we want to know, for those that felt as though they hadn't felt trauma as a result of racism, have you changed your mind? That is our question here. Have you now changed your mind, going off of what Dr. Vanderkolk said about maybe that question? At first, people tend to say no, but I do know that going back to what Daisy said about her granddaughter talking about the George Floyd video, I know myself, I cried when I saw that video. That's a trauma. But I also know that when you do perpetrate racism and you hurt people, what you do to others is coming back to you. And so if more people knew that, I do believe they would not do those things, or they would not participate in those things, because you are harming yourself equally. So we asked that question. So have you felt trauma as a result of racism? And we will get to those results here in a second. But I do know that Bessel and Lisha, were you planning to exit at 8:30?
We
do want to acknowledge your departure.
Do you want to
We
stay
are,
longer?
because we have friends of, but I'm also very curious about you guys. So I'm going to hang out a little bit longer, but I may sort of disappear at some point.
Excellent. So we do have those poll results. And now, yes, it does appear people have changed their mind, because we now have 76% said yes and 24% said no.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
Yes.
Wow.
And while we've been on this panel, we have had a number of questions from our audience here. So we have a question here from Lauren asked, what can people of color do to navigate these sorts of safe spaces and have these conversations when the experiences within these conversations can trigger racial trauma? Being talked over, these were the examples, being talked over by privileged counterparts, white people centering themselves in the conversation. Excellent question. Would any of our panelists like to jump in and respond to that?
Please.
So Alexis, go ahead.
I would. I'm just trying to find, can you repeat the question? I just want to make sure I touch all the points.
I got it, Angie. What can people of color do to navigate these sorts of safe spaces and have these conversations when the experiences within these conversations can often trigger racial trauma, i.e. being talked over by privileged counterparts, white people centering themselves in the conversation, and et cetera?
So one of the things you can do, I'm imagining that this is happening in a workplace or some kind of personal setting where people are intentionally doing this, because these type of discussions don't really happen without intention. So if you're having an intentional discussion around it, you can hire someone to help. But two, these discussions can be had separately, and people can process and understand where they are, develop the language for their own experience as it relates to racism and intergenerational trauma. And then once you've gotten clear and even on where you are and your own self, then it is safe to begin to have these discussions. Because in a society where you have power and privilege, it is not always safe for people of lower privilege to have these discussions. It is going to be a re-traumatizing experience. So if this is something that you can't avoid without guided help, if you're a person of color, take care of yourself first. If you don't have it today, don't engage in the conversation. You're not required, and it is emotional labor, and it can subject you to more harm.
Good. Good.
And let's go to Reverend Glenn. Would you like to add on to that?
Unmute.
You're muted, Reverend Glenn.
I think it's important to understand the flip side of racism from what most people would call the perpetrator. The perpetrator doesn't realize they are the perpetrator because of the structures in the United States, particularly around race, law, and power. And so it creates these social constructs where there's a level of normacy to what goes on a daily basis in our country. And so that person who's privileged has no idea that they are privileged, just as they don't know that they oppress people. And so there's a good book out called White Fragility. And it talks about how fragile people are when you get into conversations about race, because it's an area where they're unfamiliar with. And so for the most part, if you're white in America, you don't study racism and you don't study slavery. And so those two bodies of lack of knowledge does cause what we call plausible deniability, in that, I sense there's something wrong. I may be told that there's something wrong, but I'd rather not deal with it. And so the George Floyd incident, through the grace of technology, put it in everyone's face. It was right there in everyone's lap. And everyone said, is this really our country? And we had to come to grips with, yes, it is. This is not a one-off situation. It happens frequently in our country. But this cell phone that we all carry now has a camera, and it was caught on tape. And when you saw those 8 minutes, it was deplorable. And so that's why we're here today as a result of that. And so I think that plausible deniability that serves as a shield for many of us, and that doesn't just mean whites, it's blacks too. We deny things about ourselves, about our race, and as a result, we don't have courageous conversations about the need for everyone to find that intersectionality is the point where we all need to change.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Glenn. We had another question that came in a little bit earlier in the program from Sherry. Address people who are overtly racist without further alienating them, and we help them be less hateful. I know that you wanted to chime in on this.
Sorry, Phil, who?
Vince, you broke up, Phil.
Okay, yep. Vince, would you like to chime in on that?
Yeah, well, in response to what Glenn says, I mean, for me, I know racism is bad, right? But when I grew up in Detroit, and then we crossed over to 8 Mile, then I'm out to LA, and so I didn't experience it. So it started not feeling real to me because it wasn't in my daily experience. And it was only, about 5 years ago when I came to Unity. We're sitting in a men's group. There's no agenda. There's no political bias. It's just men sharing with each other, right? And Reverend Lee is in there. And he tells the story. He's a corporate guy. My experience with my friends in the old neighborhood, we were all thugs, and we were criminals. And so it was a different experience with police. But when I heard him tell this story, and this was only 5 years ago, he said, he gave the experience of, first he had to be hyper vigilant whenever he drove his car, whenever those lights flashed, and I immediately related to that experience of hypervigilance. And then because it was him telling the story, somebody that I held in high regard, and there was no agenda, everybody's just sharing, that's when it became real to me. Like the experience of racism, it became mine, not in the way that it's I'll never know what that is, but in that moment, I viscerally felt it, and it changed me, So it can be a traumatic experience like George Floyd, but it can also be conversations like these where you respect one another, you hold each other in high regard, you're allowed to make mistakes because of your programming, and then good things can come of it. That's another way to get through those neural pathways, to break them down and have the experience. I love the quote, nothing is real until it's experienced. And it's so true, because I can't tell you how many times I learned something that was new to me that everybody else knew, but I was excited. I was excited and I had to tell everybody about it. That's all.
So I'm sorry, did Alexis, did you want to address Sherry's question? How can we address people who are overtly racist without further alienating them? And how do we help them be less hateful? In my experience, if I'm allowed to go, in my experience, for people who are overtly racist, they need to find a common ground. And sometimes people, they don't necessarily look at you as an equal or a human. But if you have common experiences, sometimes you have to reach out to them and find out what their experiences are. And if you find common experiences, they say, you know what, this person is kind of going through the same thing I'm going through. And right there, that's when you have somewhat of a breakthrough. If they have a breakthrough and saying, you know what, why am I feeling this way when we are essentially the same? You know, this person is poor, like I'm poor. We're both struggling to try and feed our families. And I am just not liking them, or I'm hating them for no reason. The problem is that sometimes it's tough to get to that place, because when we have a conversation with hateful people, hateful things come out of our mouths. And as long as we're having a hateful exchange, no one really is listening. So that's when a centering exercise like Lisha did, where you take that breath and you just kind of think about things, helps you out, in my experience, towards being able to calm down and center yourself to where you can try and maybe find a different angle so that you can have that conversation.
Yes, Phil, and I have noticed too that when you talk about overtly racist people, or how racism exists along a spectrum of sort of this, well, I know it exists, but I don't know what to do about it, all the way to hateful with some ignorance in between, some shame, some guilt along that spectrum. When you get to people that are very overtly racist, I have noticed that they are traumatized as well. The people that I have known that would do that have trauma in their history. It's not necessarily racial trauma, but they came from traumatic backgrounds, alcoholism in the family, death of close family members, things like that. And it makes me think of that saying that hurt people hurt people. But because of the systems in our country and this hierarchy that has been constructed, they can displace their own trauma and their own internal anger onto somebody else. And the system supports that. And that's what I would like to see broken down. We have another question from Dolores. How do you start to heal when you are experiencing the trauma daily at the same time your children, grandchildren are being victimized at the same time? And let me just first acknowledge that that question is heartbreaking when I think about it. So I'd like to open that up to our panelists. How do you start to heal when you're experiencing the trauma daily at the same time your children and your grandchildren are also being victimized?
I would like to speak to that. So if it is ongoing, it's not, I would like to ask, reframing your perspective would be helpful if it's ongoing. It's not about how do you start to heal, it's how do you live with and maintain presence of your mind. Because like the fact that it's still going, is how do I survive this? Or how do I emerge from this in a thriving manner? And so I would suggest that you begin to build community, because having language for how to describe your experiences gives you the ability to externalize it instead of internalize it. And strategies happen in community. Strategies come up. You can create systems of safety within this greater system. You can, but also too, if you are a person of color, since this is a spiritual community, practice ancestral veneration. You have intergenerational trauma, and you can use the power of presence and intention to heal that your ancestors, which is the response that comes before knowledge that lives in us when we arrived, right? That visceral response that is beyond this lived experience which is your ancestors that live still in you. And in so the field of epigenetics is how our lived experience is programmed into our genome. And so what happens through our lived experience is the instructions of our life get encoded for us to be able to pass down for more generations and generations and generations. And so if it's ongoing, you inserting resilience factors helps the lineage that goes beyond you, but it also helps you in your lived experience today, and then reaches back into time and helps heal your ancestors. And I promise you, if you do that practice, you will begin to heal in the stages of life that you can do, in the timing that you can do it, because this is not a quick fix. It's not something you're gonna heal just like snap your fingers and tomorrow is not ongoing. So it's how do we live with and emerge in a thriving manner is a perspective as a person of color you have to approach this trauma with.
And Daisy, you had spoke of your granddaughter earlier. I know you're a grandmother. I know you have daughters yourself and a granddaughter. Would you like to respond to that question as well?
Sure. Well, mine is conversation. We talk about it. I remember, and I have to share this because it's important. I remember when my two oldest daughters, who's now 30 and 29, were about 5 years old, 5 and 6, I showed them Roots. And I watched it with them. And we cried because it was real. It was very real. But I needed them to understand the world that we were in. And I needed them to understand also that we didn't have to be the world. We didn't have to be what we experienced. We didn't have to be what we call bad. You get what I'm saying? So for me, it was always through conversation, and then it was my action. Education in the city over the years at the city of Detroit has declined. And I hate to say that because I love the city. So I took my girls out of the city schools and I put them in a suburb school. So that meant that they were exposed to everything in terms of racism. And they would come home and talk to me about it, and we'd really talk. And if it got to be too much or if it got out of hand, then I'd have to call the school, or we'd have to have a meeting with the parents and so on and so forth. It still goes on to this day. My granddaughter, I'm doing the same thing with my granddaughter. And she had the experience where a little boy on the bus called her the N-word. Mm-hmm. And she knew what that meant. He knew what it meant. They had a meeting with my daughter and my granddaughter and the other parents at the school. And they explained to the young man that, you don't go around calling people this, blah, 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 so on and so forth. But it's deep. It's deep. It's so deep that if you're trying to heal, it almost seems like a worthless effort if you're trying to teach your children and the rest of the world is not feeling you. And you know what I'm saying? They're not, some of the other people in the world aren't feeling where you're coming from. You have to be the change you want to see. That helped me because the world didn't change. There's still a lot of people in here and it may not ever change, but what are you going to do to make the difference for your world and for the people in your world? How are you going to express love? Because that's really what is missing. It's just needing a little love in the situation. And I love the meditation part because that got me to that next step. I didn't realize it until I got older, but it got me there, and maybe it took the Tina Turner movie to figure it out about the Nam Myoho Renge Kyo and chanting. But when I learned that, it opened up a whole new world for me. And it helped me become a little more open for my children and for my grandchildren, just to teach them You know, it's a hard place out here, but I'm telling you, it could be so beautiful if you just know where to get your gold and how to share your gold with other people.
You have to have a sense that the gold is out there, and that's what other people can do for you.
Yes.
We all have to collectively believe in the gold that's there for us to have.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Daisy, for answering that. I couldn't help but think that your granddaughter experiencing that at 9 years old, that could be considered a trauma. And I couldn't help but think that any little boy who's around that age who's using that language learned it from somewhere, and that is a trauma as well, because he may know what the word means, sort of, but does he know what he's really, you know, at 9 or 10, does he know what he's actually doing? And do whomever taught him that, do they know what they were doing in modeling that? And that is an example of trauma. Lenise, I'd like to go to you now to respond.
Yeah, I just want to speak to, you know, I don't have, you know, all the words like Alexis. You know, she has some wonderful experience, even you, Angie. You know, I just know on a basic level of how I've dealt with my own trauma and trying to be a person that, you know, models healing and being the best person that I can be. And, you know, one of the things is just being aware of myself, being aware of my responses, you know, being aware of what thoughts go through my head. Because one of the other things is that a lot of times when we have these type of discussions, we have these type of meetings or groups that form around, you know, issues of race, we oftentimes cater, so to speak, to the Black person's experience. And I want to be in a space where I can give that white person who may have some racist tendencies, maybe overt, maybe, as we've said earlier, have some hateful things. I want to give a space where they can work through their trauma, they can work through their truth as well. Because if we never get to that space, we will never have the conversation and the healing. We will always be saying Black people got to take care of themselves. You got to be better than anybody. You got to handle, you know, your trauma and not react and whatever and so forth. But a white person who has either learned that behavior, been socialized into that behavior, they are traumatized as well. And you got to ask questions. So I got to be able to deal with my stuff first to even be able to sit there and listen to someone make a racist comment or off-color comment. I've got to be able to say, why do you feel that way? Why did you say that? What's the meaning behind that? Because sometimes, as we found, you know, in our group, there's some things that said, like, I wouldn't have said certain things in front of a white person, right? But because I have now gained this mutual respect, a mutual safe environment, there's certain things that I can say, that Angie can say, and that we can talk about it and say, okay, where did that come from? Why do you think like that? If I say white privilege, all of a sudden most white people, their antennas go up, they're triggered, and the conversation ends. But in a safe environment, I can say that, and someone can say, well, Lenise, why do you say that? Why are you saying that? And we can talk about it. You know, that's the thing that I want, and that's the thing that I'm proud of with Act Now and with our particular subgroup, is that we can have those deep conversations and make the mistake. I might make a mistake and say something. A white person is definitely gonna make a mistake and say something that would probably offend us. But instead of getting offended, I'm saying, why did you say that? Or explain why that comment is racist. And so I think a lot of it is your personal responsibility in this whole thing. And I'm just proud that we're having these discussions with action, because we've had the discussions over and over and over. And, you know, one group will have it. This group, the Black group, will have it. whites will have it. And I don't want any white person being guilty or feeling like that I'm a charity case or feeling sorry that they gotta fix it. They can't. They cannot. But we can have the conversation and come, somebody said it earlier, to a mutual experience so that we can uncover our different experiences.
Absolutely. Vince, I know you wanted to chime in, and then we were going to move on to Julie right after that.
Yeah, there's so much awesomeness. I mean, starting from Angie and all the way to Lenise, I think the common ground is that the human experience is traumatic. It doesn't matter if you're coming from a materialist perspective where, it's material and you're all energy. Even if we're all energy and that's it, and there's no higher consciousness, it's still traumatic to be trapped in these cells, right? So it's traumatic. And as spiritual beings having a human experience, it's traumatic. So if we can come together on the fact that, look, we're going through this trauma together. My triggers are different than your triggers, but I know how you feel when you talk about hypervigilance and always feeling less than and always feeling, look, I get it. I understand it. I lived it. It was painful. Here's how I worked my way through it. And I still got some weird, I'm stuck somewhere. Maybe you can teach me through your experience how to get unstuck. But it only happens when we say, because here's the thing in America, they won't acknowledge the trauma. And if you don't acknowledge the trauma as a collective, it can't happen. But what we can do is in our subgroups, we can acknowledge the trauma and we can share our trauma with each other and be like, oh yeah, it's crazy how quick the conversations start to flow once you say, yeah, I felt this way because of this. Oh, I felt this way because of this. And it's the same. It's common ground. I mean, this is a beautiful, this whole thing. I can't wait for the next one.
It really is a beautiful conversation. We have a quick comment from Reverend Glenn, and then we'd like to wrap up with the question, what does safety from racism and trauma look like? And what is this world that we're trying to co-create? But first we'll go to Reverend Glenn.
I just wanted to say, piggybacking on Vince's comment, I'm a therapist by training. And I don't see the world through the eyes of trauma. I see it through the eyes of love. And I look for the love in everyone. Now, it may be hidden and there for me to discover, but I look for love in everyone. And that's my opportunity to penetrate their trauma and my trauma. So I just want to be clear on my perspective of life and what my spiritual walk is all about.
Thank you, Reverend Glenn.
Yes.
And Bessel, we do realize that you all have to leave, and we're getting very close to closing out soon anyway, but we wanted to acknowledge your presence and thank you for coming and joining us in this conversation and uplifting everyone in this program. So
very much like to thank you for this opportunity, and I think it's wonderful that you guys are getting together as a congregation, that you're broadcasting it, that you are who you are. And you know what? The answer is not going to come from outside of yourself. It's interesting that Denise says, I don't have any words, and then she comes out and says the words. And so keep practicing your words and do what you're doing. I think it's God's work. It's fantastic. I feel such a privilege to have been part of this. Thank you very much.
It was wonderful to be with you tonight, and I hope that we see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. So our last question here, and what does safety look like, and what is this world we're trying to co-create? Really quickly, I just want to say that I want to live in a world where it's safe to be what I would call a full spectrum human being, where I don't have to live up to any type of stereotype or anything like that, and that my experiences as a unique individual are valued, and that everybody here, their unique gifts and experiences and backgrounds and contributions to this society are all valued, equally and yet uniquely, like we're all special and no one's special, that kind of thing. What about you all? Who would like to go next? All right, go ahead, Alexis.
Sorry, the mute wasn't working. So a world safe from racism looks like a shared future. And we have lived on this planet with a very divided past. And so to me, the call is to make the commitment to live for a shared future today. And what that means is that I'm safe to be me, you safe to be you, and we are all safe to be we. And so we don't other in a way that is punitive. Our justice systems are restorative. Our intention is to create societies that are peaceful and not heal from harm. We have a more proactive perspective for the society that we want to live in, and not just a reactionary perspective to the problems that ail us, like that we tackle problems head on as opposed to waiting till they too loud for us not to react.
Julie, would you like to jump in?
I would, yes, thank you. To me, it looks like a commitment on a systemic level and a commitment on a personal level for people to engage in this type of conversation. This is the way that we start to shift and making a commitment to do so, and just to be present, just to listen, to try to be free from judgment. And this is the exact conversation I could see really moving us forward in a really positive way. So I thank you all for that.
Phil, would you like to comment?
A world safe from the trauma of racism, to me, is a world where we come together. In my mind, you know, I think Martin Luther King started to go down that road in the "I Have a Dream" speech when he said little white girls and little white boys could be hand in hand with little black boys and black girls, and we all come together and realize the greatness that this country can be as one, without the pretenses of the prejudices and racism, and we're starting to get there as a society. You know, we realize that diversity is a better way because you get many perspectives, but we have a long way to go. And so I just think that we're working towards that. This group here is it's proof of that. But again, there's a lot of work to do. And I know we need to close out soon. So Angie, I'll turn it over to you. Then I don't know, maybe Reverend Glenn wants to say something before we close out.
Yes, definitely. I'd like to hear from Reverend Glenn, and then we will have our closing, our prayer.
I just want to say thank you to Angie and Phil and the panelists. Being part of the spiritual community, which we call Renaissance Unity, is an honor and a privilege. And to serve as a minister in this community is definitely something that boggles my mind, you know, each and every day. But I know it comes with responsibility. When we move down that path to change, it's really the course that we're placed in our life. Our journey as spiritual beings having a human experience is about going through all the experience of life and realize they're all for our good. And the calling is for us to continuously go to a higher and higher level of consciousness. And it's with that super consciousness that we begin to see the heart of everyone. And that heart is filled with love. And that's what we all want. The way we express that need, that want, that desire is different. Sometimes it's couched in anger because we don't have it. But we all want that love. And so I hope that all of us continue the journey through life and not sit complacently and think that it's the responsibility of someone else to create change. As we said, be the change that you want to see in others. Role model the behavior, the ideas, the thought patterns that will lead, the evidence, the change. It's possible, and it's our mission. God bless everyone for having me tonight.
thank you all for joining us. And well, it's time for us to say goodbye and have a good night. I'd like to thank all the panelists for your time today, and everyone have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Yes, thank you. And we'd like to make this an ongoing conversation where we explore different topics. So thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you.